the new God of iniquitylessness, the new gods of iniquitylessness, the new God of iniquitylessness, the new goddess of iniquitylessness, the new goddesses of iniquitylessness, the new goddess of iniquitylessness, the old God of iniquitylessness, the old gods of iniquitylessness, the old God of iniquitylessness, the old goddess of iniquitylessness, the old goddesses of iniquitylessness, the old goddess of iniquitylessness, the greater God of iniquitylessness, the greater gods of iniquitylessness, the greater God of iniquitylessness, the greater goddess of iniquitylessness, the greater goddesses of iniquitylessness, the greater goddess of iniquitylessness, the lesser God of iniquitylessness, the lesser gods of iniquitylessness, the lesser God of iniquitylessness, the lesser goddess of iniquitylessness, the lesser goddesses of iniquitylessness, the lesser goddess of iniquitylessness, the higher God of iniquitylessness, the higher gods of iniquitylessness, the higher God of iniquitylessness, the higher goddess of iniquitylessness, the higher goddesses of iniquitylessness, the higher goddess of iniquitylessness, the lower God of iniquitylessness, the lower gods of iniquitylessness, the lower God of iniquitylessness, the lower goddess of iniquitylessness, the lower goddesses of iniquitylessness, the lower goddess of iniquitylessness, the greater spirit of iniquitylessness, the greater spirits of iniquitylessness, the greater spirit of iniquitylessness, the lesser spirit of iniquitylessness, the lesser spirits of iniquitylessness, the lesser spirit of iniquitylessness, the higher spirit of iniquitylessness, the higher spirits of iniquitylessness, the higher spirit of iniquitylessness, the lower spirit of iniquitylessness, the lower spirits of iniquitylessness, the lower spirit of iniquitylessness, the major God of iniquitylessness, the major gods of iniquitylessness, the major God of iniquitylessness, the major goddess of iniquitylessness, the major goddesses of iniquitylessness, the major goddess of iniquitylessness, the minor God of iniquitylessness, the minor gods of iniquitylessness, the minor God of iniquitylessness, the minor goddess of iniquitylessness, the minor goddesses of iniquitylessness, the minor goddess of iniquitylessness, the superior God of iniquitylessness, the superior gods of iniquitylessness, the superior God of iniquitylessness, the superior goddess of iniquitylessness, the superior goddesses of iniquitylessness, the superior goddess of iniquitylessness, the inferior God of iniquitylessness, the inferior gods of iniquitylessness, the inferior God of iniquitylessness, the inferior goddess of iniquitylessness, the inferior goddesses of iniquitylessness, the inferior goddess of iniquitylessness, the ancestor God of iniquitylessness, the ancestor gods of iniquitylessness, the ancestor God of iniquitylessness, the ancestor goddess of iniquitylessness, the ancestor goddesses of iniquitylessness, the ancestor goddess of iniquitylessness, the ascendant God of iniquitylessness, the ascendant gods of iniquitylessness, the ascendant God of iniquitylessness, the ascendant goddess of iniquitylessness, the ascendant goddesses of iniquitylessness, the ascendant goddess of iniquitylessness, the descendant God of iniquitylessness, the descendant gods of iniquitylessness, the descendant God of iniquitylessness, the descendant goddess of iniquitylessness, the descendant goddesses of iniquitylessness, the descendant goddess of iniquitylessness, the transcendent God of iniquitylessness, the transcendent gods of iniquitylessness, the transcendent God of iniquitylessness, the transcendent goddess of iniquitylessness, the transcendent goddesses of iniquitylessness, the transcendent goddess of iniquitylessness, the past God of iniquitylessness, the past gods of iniquitylessness, the past God of iniquitylessness, The past goddess of iniquitylessness. The past goddesses of iniquitylessness. The past goddess of iniquitylessness. The present god of iniquitylessness. The present gods of iniquitylessness. The present god of iniquitylessness. The present goddess of iniquitylessness. The present goddesses of iniquitylessness. The present goddess of iniquitylessness. The future god of iniquitylessness. The future gods of iniquitylessness. The future god of iniquitylessness. The future goddess of iniquitylessness. The future goddesses of iniquitylessness. The future goddess of iniquitylessness. The authentic god of iniquitylessness. The authentic gods of iniquitylessness. The authentic god of iniquitylessness. The authentic goddess of iniquitylessness. The authentic goddesses of iniquitylessness. The authentic goddess of iniquitylessness. The synthetic god of iniquitylessness. The synthetic gods of iniquitylessness. The synthetic god of iniquitylessness. The synthetic goddess of iniquitylessness. The synthetic goddesses of iniquitylessness. The synthetic goddess of iniquitylessness. The progressive god of iniquitylessness. The progressive gods of iniquitylessness. The progressive god of iniquitylessness. The progressive goddess of iniquitylessness. The progressive goddesses of iniquitylessness. The progressive goddess of iniquitylessness. The regressive god of iniquitylessness. The regressive gods of iniquitylessness. The regressive god of iniquitylessness. The regressive goddess of iniquitylessness. The regressive goddesses of iniquitylessness. The regressive goddess of iniquitylessness. The ordinary god of iniquitylessness. The ordinary gods of iniquitylessness. The ordinary god of iniquitylessness. The ordinary goddess of iniquitylessness. The ordinary goddesses of iniquitylessness. The ordinary goddess of iniquitylessness. The extraordinary god of iniquitylessness. The extraordinary gods of iniquitylessness. The extraordinary god of iniquitylessness. The extraordinary goddess of iniquitylessness. The extraordinary goddesses of iniquitylessness. The extraordinary goddess of iniquitylessness. The static god of iniquitylessness. The static gods of iniquitylessness. The static god of iniquitylessness. The static goddess of iniquitylessness. The static goddesses of iniquitylessness. The static goddess of iniquitylessness. The dynamic god of iniquitylessness. The dynamic gods of iniquitylessness. The dynamic god of iniquitylessness. The dynamic goddess of iniquitylessness. The dynamic goddesses of iniquitylessness. The dynamic goddess of iniquitylessness. The land god of iniquitylessness. The land gods of iniquitylessness. The land god of iniquitylessness. The land goddess of iniquitylessness. The land goddesses of iniquitylessness. The land goddess of iniquitylessness. The sea god of iniquitylessness. The sea gods of iniquitylessness. The sea god of iniquitylessness. The sea goddess of iniquitylessness. The sea goddesses of iniquitylessness. The sea goddess of iniquitylessness. The sky god of iniquitylessness. The sky gods of iniquitylessness. The sky god of iniquitylessness. The sky goddess of iniquitylessness. The sky goddesses of iniquitylessness. The sky goddess of iniquitylessness. The god of iniquitylessness. The gods of iniquitylessness. The god of iniquitylessness. The goddess of iniquitylessness. The goddesses of iniquitylessness. The goddess of iniquitylessness. The half god of iniquitylessness. The half gods of iniquitylessness. The half god of iniquitylessness. The half goddess of iniquitylessness. The half goddesses of iniquitylessness. The half goddess of iniquitylessness. The vessel of iniquitylessness. The vessels of iniquitylessness. The vessel of iniquitylessness. The name of iniquitylessness. The names of iniquitylessness. The name of iniquitylessness. The person of iniquitylessness. The persons of iniquitylessness. The person of iniquitylessness. The person of iniquitylessness. The personas of iniquitylessness. The person of iniquitylessness. The personage of iniquitylessness. The personages of iniquitylessness. The personage of iniquitylessness. The personality of iniquitylessness. The personalities of iniquitylessness. The personality of iniquitylessness. The personification of iniquitylessness. The personifications of iniquitylessness. The personification of iniquitylessness. The image of iniquitylessness. The images of iniquitylessness. The image of iniquitylessness. The imagination of iniquitylessness. The imaginations of iniquitylessness. The imagination of iniquitylessness. The belief of iniquitylessness. The beliefs of iniquitylessness. The belief of iniquitylessness. The thought of iniquitylessness. The thoughts of iniquitylessness. The thought of iniquitylessness. The word of iniquitylessness. The words of iniquitylessness. The word of iniquitylessness. The action of iniquitylessness. The actions of iniquitylessness. The action of iniquitylessness. The reaction of iniquitylessness. The reactions of iniquitylessness. The reaction of iniquitylessness. The feeling of iniquitylessness. The feelings of iniquitylessness. The feeling of iniquitylessness. The situation of iniquitylessness. The situations of iniquitylessness. The situation of iniquitylessness. The circumstance of iniquitylessness. The circumstances of iniquitylessness. The circumstance of iniquitylessness. The environment of iniquitylessness. The environments of iniquitylessness. The environment of iniquitylessness. The relationship of iniquitylessness. The relationships of iniquitylessness. The relationship of iniquitylessness. The number of iniquitylessness. The numbers of iniquitylessness. The number of iniquitylessness. The formula of iniquitylessness. The formulas of iniquitylessness. The formula of iniquitylessness. The equation of iniquitylessness. The equations of iniquitylessness. The equation of iniquitylessness. The theory of iniquitylessness. The theories of iniquitylessness. The theory of iniquitylessness. The symbol of iniquitylessness. The symbols of iniquitylessness. The symbol of iniquitylessness. The color of iniquitylessness. The colors of iniquitylessness. The color of iniquitylessness. The thing of iniquitylessness. The things of iniquitylessness. The thing of iniquitylessness. The way of iniquitylessness. The ways of iniquitylessness. The way of iniquitylessness. The place of iniquitylessness. The places of iniquitylessness. The place of iniquitylessness. The time of iniquitylessness. The times of iniquitylessness. The time of iniquitylessness. The event of iniquitylessness. The events of iniquitylessness. The event of iniquitylessness. The result of iniquitylessness. The results of iniquitylessness. The result of iniquitylessness. The crown of iniquitylessness. The crowns of iniquitylessness. The crown of iniquitylessness. The throne of iniquitylessness. The thrones of iniquitylessness. The throne of iniquitylessness. The iniquitylessnasking. The iniquitylessnaskings. The iniquitylessness kingdom. The iniquitylessness kingdoms. The iniquitylessnasking subject. The iniquitylessnasking subjects. The iniquitylessnasking's dominion. The iniquitylessnasking's dominions. The kingdom of iniquitylessness. The kingdoms of iniquitylessness. The kingdom of iniquitylessness. The iniquitylessnas queen. The iniquitylessnas queens. The iniquitylessnas queendom. The iniquitylessnas queendoms. The iniquitylessnas queen subject. The iniquitylessnas queen subjects. The iniquitylessnas queen's dominion. The iniquitylessnas queen's dominions. The queendom of iniquitylessness. The queendoms of iniquitylessness. The queendom of iniquitylessness. The iniquitylessness prince. The iniquitylessness princes. The iniquitylessness princedom. The iniquitylessness princedoms. The iniquitylessness princes subject. The iniquitylessness princes subjects. The iniquitylessness princes dominion. The iniquitylessness princes dominions. The princedom of iniquitylessness. The princedoms of iniquitylessness. The princedom of iniquitylessness. The iniquitylessness princess. The iniquitylessness princesses. The iniquitylessness princessdom. The iniquitylessness princessdoms. The iniquitylessness princesses subject. The iniquitylessness princesses subjects. The iniquitylessness princesses dominion. The iniquitylessness princesses dominions. The princessdom of iniquitylessness. The princessdoms of iniquitylessness. The princessdom of iniquitylessness. The lord of iniquitylessness. The lords of iniquitylessness. The lord of iniquitylessness. The lordess of iniquitylessness. The lordesses of iniquitylessness. The lordess of iniquitylessness. The priest of iniquitylessness. The priests of iniquitylessness. The priest of iniquitylessness. The priestess of iniquitylessness. The priestesses of iniquitylessness. The priestess of iniquitylessness. The ritual of iniquitylessness. The rituals of iniquitylessness. The ritual of iniquitylessness. The shrine of iniquitylessness. The shrines of iniquitylessness. The shrine of iniquitylessness. The temple of iniquitylessness. The temples of iniquitylessness. The temple of iniquitylessness. The leader of iniquitylessness. The leaders of iniquitylessness. The leader of iniquitylessness. The follower of iniquitylessness. The followers of iniquitylessness. The follower of iniquitylessness. The natural substance of iniquitylessness. The natural substances of iniquitylessness. The natural substance of iniquitylessness. The supernatural substance of iniquitylessness. The supernatural substances of iniquitylessness. The supernatural substance of iniquitylessness. The temporal substance of iniquitylessness. The temporal substances of iniquitylessness. The temporal substance of iniquitylessness. The spiritual substance of iniquitylessness. The spiritual substances of iniquitylessness. The spiritual substance of iniquitylessness. The natural form of iniquitylessness. The natural forms of iniquitylessness. The natural form of iniquitylessness. The supernatural form of iniquitylessness. The supernatural forms of iniquitylessness. The supernatural form of iniquitylessness. The temporal form of iniquitylessness. The temporal forms of iniquitylessness. The temporal form of iniquitylessness. The spiritual form of iniquitylessness. The spiritual forms of iniquitylessness. The spiritual form of iniquitylessness. The age of iniquitylessness. The ages of iniquitylessness. The age of iniquitylessness. The era of iniquitylessness. The eras of iniquitylessness. The era of iniquitylessness. The awakener of iniquitylessness. The awakeners of iniquitylessness. The awakener of iniquitylessness. The awakening of iniquitylessness. The awakenings of iniquitylessness. The awakening of iniquitylessness. The realm of iniquitylessness. The realms of iniquitylessness. The realm of iniquitylessness. The dimension of iniquitylessness. The dimensions of iniquitylessness. The dimension of iniquitylessness. The zone of iniquitylessness. The zones of iniquitylessness. The zone of iniquitylessness. The frequency of iniquitylessness. The frequencies of iniquitylessness. The frequency of iniquitylessness. The century of iniquitylessness. The centuries of iniquitylessness. The century of iniquitylessness. The millennium of iniquitylessness. The millenniums of iniquitylessness. The millennium of iniquitylessness. The purpose of iniquitylessness. The purposes of iniquitylessness. The purpose of iniquitylessness. The meaning of iniquitylessness. The meanings of iniquitylessness. The meaning of iniquitylessness. The culture of iniquitylessness. The cultures of iniquitylessness. The culture of iniquitylessness. The demonstrator of iniquitylessness. The demonstrators of iniquitylessness. The demonstrator of iniquitylessness. The demonstration of iniquitylessness. The demonstrations of iniquitylessness. The demonstration of iniquitylessness. The manifester of iniquitylessness. The manifestors of iniquitylessness. The manifester of iniquitylessness. The manifestation of iniquitylessness. The manifestations of iniquitylessness. The manifestation of iniquitylessness. The presence of iniquitylessness. The presences of iniquitylessness. The presence of iniquitylessness. The glow of iniquitylessness. The glows of iniquitylessness. The glow of iniquitylessness. The goal of iniquitylessness. The goals of iniquitylessness. The goal of iniquitylessness. The plan of iniquitylessness. The plans of iniquitylessness. The plan of iniquitylessness. The book of iniquitylessness. The books of iniquitylessness. The book of iniquitylessness. The philosopher of iniquitylessness. The philosophers of iniquitylessness. The philosopher of iniquitylessness. The philosophy of iniquitylessness. The philosophies of iniquitylessness. The philosophy of iniquitylessness. The releaser of iniquitylessness. The releasers of iniquitylessness. The releaser of iniquitylessness. The release of iniquitylessness. The releases of iniquitylessness. The release of iniquitylessness. The variable of iniquitylessness. The variables of iniquitylessness. The variable of iniquitylessness. The cause of iniquitylessness. The causes of iniquitylessness. The cause of iniquitylessness. The effect of iniquitylessness. The effects of iniquitylessness. The effect of iniquitylessness. The journey of iniquitylessness. The journeys of iniquitylessness. The journey of iniquitylessness. The emergence of iniquitylessness. The emergences of iniquitylessness. The emergence of iniquitylessness. The source of iniquitylessness. The sources of iniquitylessness. The source of iniquitylessness. The originator of iniquitylessness. The originators of iniquitylessness. The originator of iniquitylessness. The origin of iniquitylessness. The origins of iniquitylessness. The origin of iniquitylessness. The forefather of iniquitylessness. The forefathers of iniquitylessness. The forefather of iniquitylessness. The foremother of iniquitylessness. The foremothers of iniquitylessness. The foremother of iniquitylessness. The ancestor of iniquitylessness. The ancestors of iniquitylessness. The ancestor of iniquitylessness. The descendant of iniquitylessness. The descendants of iniquitylessness. The descendant of iniquitylessness. The lineage of iniquitylessness. The lineages of iniquitylessness. The lineage of iniquitylessness. The heritage of iniquitylessness. The heritages of iniquitylessness. The heritage of iniquitylessness. The heir of iniquitylessness. The heirs of iniquitylessness. The heir of iniquitylessness. The co-heir of iniquitylessness. The co-heirs of iniquitylessness. The co-heir of iniquitylessness. The joint heir of iniquitylessness. The joint heirs of iniquitylessness. The joint heir of iniquitylessness. The dynasty of iniquitylessness. The dynasties of iniquitylessness. The dynasty of iniquitylessness. The force of iniquitylessness. The forces of iniquitylessness. The force of iniquitylessness. The law of iniquitylessness. The laws of iniquitylessness. The law of iniquitylessness. The pact of iniquitylessness. The pacts of iniquitylessness. The pact of iniquitylessness. The game of iniquitylessness. The games of iniquitylessness. The game of iniquitylessness. The mask of iniquitylessness. The masks of iniquitylessness. The mask of iniquitylessness. The armor of iniquitylessness. The armors of iniquitylessness. The armor of iniquitylessness. The sword of iniquitylessness. The swords of iniquitylessness. The sword of iniquitylessness. The shield of iniquitylessness. The shields of iniquitylessness. The shield of iniquitylessness. The force shield of iniquitylessness. The force shields of iniquitylessness. The force shield of iniquitylessness. The armored force shield of iniquitylessness. The armored force shields of iniquitylessness. The armored force shield of iniquitylessness. The champion of iniquitylessness. The champions of iniquitylessness. The champion of iniquitylessness. The guardian of iniquitylessness. The guardians of iniquitylessness. The guardian of iniquitylessness. The defender of iniquitylessness. The defenders of iniquitylessness. The defender of iniquitylessness. The protector of iniquitylessness. The protectors of iniquitylessness. The protector of iniquitylessness. The chant of iniquitylessness. The chants of iniquitylessness. The chant of iniquitylessness. The shape of iniquitylessness. The shapes of iniquitylessness. The shape of iniquitylessness. The cube of iniquitylessness. The cubes of iniquitylessness. The cube of iniquitylessness. The cuboid of iniquitylessness. The cuboids of iniquitylessness. The cuboid of iniquitylessness. The sphere of iniquitylessness. The spheres of iniquitylessness. The sphere of iniquitylessness. The spheroid of iniquitylessness. The spheroids of iniquitylessness. The spheroid of iniquitylessness. The prism of iniquitylessness. The prisms of iniquitylessness. The prism of iniquitylessness. The pyramid of iniquitylessness. The pyramids of iniquitylessness. The pyramid of iniquitylessness. The cylinder of iniquitylessness. The cylinders of iniquitylessness. The cylinder of iniquitylessness. The cone of iniquitylessness. The cones of iniquitylessness. The cone of iniquitylessness. The triangle of iniquitylessness. The triangles of iniquitylessness. The triangle of iniquitylessness. The circle of iniquitylessness. The circles of iniquitylessness. The circle of iniquitylessness. The semicircle of iniquitylessness. The semicircles of iniquitylessness. The semicircle of iniquitylessness. The square of iniquitylessness. The squares of iniquitylessness. The square of iniquitylessness. The rectangle of iniquitylessness. The rectangles of iniquitylessness. The rectangle of iniquitylessness. The parallelogram of iniquitylessness. The parallelograms of iniquitylessness. The parallelogram of iniquitylessness. The rhombus of iniquitylessness. The rhombuses of iniquitylessness. The rhombus of iniquitylessness. The trapezoid of iniquitylessness. The trapezoids of iniquitylessness. The trapezoid of iniquitylessness. The polygon of iniquitylessness. The polygons of iniquitylessness. The polygon of iniquitylessness. The pentagon of iniquitylessness. The pentagons of iniquitylessness. The pentagon of iniquitylessness. The hexagon of iniquitylessness. The hexagons of iniquitylessness. The hexagon of iniquitylessness. The septagon of iniquitylessness. The septagons of iniquitylessness. The septagon of iniquitylessness. The octagon of iniquitylessness. The octagons of iniquitylessness. The octagon of iniquitylessness. The nonagon of iniquitylessness. The nonagons of iniquitylessness. The nonagon of iniquitylessness. The decagon of iniquitylessness. The decagons of iniquitylessness. The decagon of iniquitylessness. The evolution of iniquitylessness. The evolutions of iniquitylessness. The evolution of iniquitylessness. The revolution of iniquitylessness. The revolutions of iniquitylessness. The revolution of iniquitylessness. The elemental art of iniquitylessness. The elemental arts of iniquitylessness. The elemental art of iniquitylessness. The elemental science of iniquitylessness. The elemental sciences of iniquitylessness. The elemental science of iniquitylessness. The elemental principle of iniquitylessness. The elemental principles of iniquitylessness. The elemental principle of iniquitylessness. The elemental technology of iniquitylessness. The elemental technologies of iniquitylessness. The elemental technology of iniquitylessness. The low elemental art of iniquitylessness. The low elemental arts of iniquitylessness. The low elemental art of iniquitylessness. The low elemental science of iniquitylessness. The low elemental sciences of iniquitylessness. The low elemental science of iniquitylessness. The low elemental principle of iniquitylessness. The low elemental principles of iniquitylessness. The low elemental principle of iniquitylessness. The low elemental technology of iniquitylessness. The low elemental technologies of iniquitylessness. The low elemental technology of iniquitylessness. The high elemental art of iniquitylessness. The high elemental arts of iniquitylessness. The high elemental art of iniquitylessness. The high elemental science of iniquitylessness. The high elemental sciences of iniquitylessness. The high elemental science of iniquitylessness. The high elemental principle of iniquitylessness. The high elemental principles of iniquitylessness. The high elemental principle of iniquitylessness. The high elemental technology of iniquitylessness. The high elemental technologies of iniquitylessness. The high elemental technology of iniquitylessness. The agent of iniquitylessness. The agents of iniquitylessness. The agent of iniquitylessness. The agency of iniquitylessness. The agencies of iniquitylessness. The agency of iniquitylessness. The amplifier of iniquitylessness. The amplifiers of iniquitylessness. The amplifier of iniquitylessness. The amplification of iniquitylessness. The amplifications of iniquitylessness. The amplification of iniquitylessness. The enhancer of iniquitylessness. The enhancer of iniquitylessness. The enhancer of iniquitylessness. The enhancement of iniquitylessness. The enhancements of iniquitylessness. The enhancement of iniquitylessness. The magnifier of iniquitylessness. The magnifiers of iniquitylessness. The magnifier of iniquitylessness. The magnification of iniquitylessness. The magnifications of iniquitylessness. The magnification of iniquitylessness. The influencer of iniquitylessness. The influencers of iniquitylessness. The influencer of iniquitylessness. The influence of iniquitylessness. The influences of iniquitylessness. The influence of iniquitylessness. The emanator of iniquitylessness. The emanators of iniquitylessness. The emanator of iniquitylessness. The emanation of iniquitylessness. The emanations of iniquitylessness. The emanation of iniquitylessness. The converger of iniquitylessness. The convergers of iniquitylessness. The converger of iniquitylessness. The convergence of iniquitylessness. The convergences of iniquitylessness. The convergence of iniquitylessness. The aura of iniquitylessness. The auras of iniquitylessness. The aura of iniquitylessness. The impression of iniquitylessness. The impressions of iniquitylessness. The impression of iniquitylessness. The intelligence of iniquitylessness. The intelligences of iniquitylessness. The intelligence of iniquitylessness. The sophistication of iniquitylessness. The sophistications of iniquitylessness. The sophistication of iniquitylessness. The genius of iniquitylessness. The geniuses of iniquitylessness. The genius of iniquitylessness. The polymath of iniquitylessness. The polymaths of iniquitylessness. The polymath of iniquitylessness. The psychic of iniquitylessness. The psychics of iniquitylessness. The psychic of iniquitylessness. The knowledge of iniquitylessness. The knowledges of iniquitylessness. The knowledge of iniquitylessness. The understanding of iniquitylessness. The understandings of iniquitylessness. The understanding of iniquitylessness. The wisdom of iniquitylessness. The wisdoms of iniquitylessness. The wisdom of iniquitylessness. The secret of iniquitylessness. The secrets of iniquitylessness. The secret of iniquitylessness. The mystery of iniquitylessness. The mysteries of iniquitylessness. The mystery of iniquitylessness. The revelation of iniquitylessness. The revelations of iniquitylessness. The revelation of iniquitylessness. The tactic of iniquitylessness. The tactics of iniquitylessness. The tactic of iniquitylessness. The strategy of iniquitylessness. The strategies of iniquitylessness. The strategy of iniquitylessness. The strength of iniquitylessness. The strengths of iniquitylessness. The strength of iniquitylessness. The might of iniquitylessness. The mights of iniquitylessness. The might of iniquitylessness. The power of iniquitylessness. The powers of iniquitylessness. The power of iniquitylessness. The authority of iniquitylessness. The authorities of iniquitylessness. The authority of iniquitylessness. The dominion of iniquitylessness. The dominions of iniquitylessness. The dominion of iniquitylessness. The rhythm of iniquitylessness. The rhythms of iniquitylessness. The rhythm of iniquitylessness. The melody of iniquitylessness. The melodies of iniquitylessness. The melody of iniquitylessness. The music of iniquitylessness. The musics of iniquitylessness. The music of iniquitylessness. The lyric of iniquitylessness. The lyrics of iniquitylessness. The lyric of iniquitylessness. The song of iniquitylessness. The songs of iniquitylessness. The song of iniquitylessness. The dance of iniquitylessness. The dances of iniquitylessness. The dance of iniquitylessness. The spirit of iniquitylessness. The spirits of iniquitylessness. The spirit of iniquitylessness. The soul of iniquitylessness. The souls of iniquitylessness. The soul of iniquitylessness. The body of iniquitylessness. The bodies of iniquitylessness. The body of iniquitylessness. The mark of iniquitylessness. The marks of iniquitylessness. The mark of iniquitylessness. The promise of iniquitylessness. The promises of iniquitylessness. The promise of iniquitylessness. The visionary of iniquitylessness. The visionaries of iniquitylessness. The visionary of iniquitylessness. The vision of iniquitylessness. The visions of iniquitylessness. The vision of iniquitylessness. The picture of iniquitylessness. The pictures of iniquitylessness. The picture of iniquitylessness. The sound of iniquitylessness. The sounds of iniquitylessness. The sound of iniquitylessness. The tongue of iniquitylessness. The tongues of iniquitylessness. The tongue of iniquitylessness. The language of iniquitylessness. The languages of iniquitylessness. The language of iniquitylessness. The communication of iniquitylessness. The communications of iniquitylessness. The communication of iniquitylessness. The people of iniquitylessness. The peoples of iniquitylessness. The people of iniquitylessness. The society of iniquitylessness. The societies of iniquitylessness. The society of iniquitylessness. The fortress of iniquitylessness. The fortresses of iniquitylessness. The fortress of iniquitylessness. The government of iniquitylessness. The governments of iniquitylessness. The government of iniquitylessness. The city of iniquitylessness. The cities of iniquitylessness. The city of iniquitylessness. The nation of iniquitylessness. The nations of iniquitylessness. The nation of iniquitylessness. The civilization of iniquitylessness. The civilizations of iniquitylessness. The civilization of iniquitylessness. The world of iniquitylessness. The worlds of iniquitylessness. The world of iniquitylessness.